Hey everybody, we're going to continue on with our content with today's talk, and first topic up is hydrogen bonds. And they're going to be the attraction between hydrogen atoms and the lone pairs of three elements: nitrogen, oxygen, and fluorine. Okay, so these three elements, they sit on the top right of the periodic table. They happen to be the most electronegative atoms on the periodic table. So let me tell you what that means for a second. Okay, electronegativity is the atom's ability to pull electrons towards itself to form bonds. Now remember, we said that most of the periodic table is unhappy except for that group way over on the right called the noble gases. So if you're sitting on the top right of the periodic table, it means you're pretty close to achieving that magical number of 8 that we call the octet rule, having 8 electrons in your outer shell. And you would do that by gaining maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 more electrons. So in the case of nitrogen, oxygen, and fluorine, you're sitting basically right there. You just got a few more electrons to get in order to get happy. So nitrogen sits in group 15. It would have to add 3. Oxygen needs to add 2. It's a group 16 element. And then fluorine's a group 17 element. It just needs 1 more electron so it can be happy. So that translates into this term called electronegativity. And that's basically an atom's pull on electrons in order to achieve that happiness, in order to ultimately bond with something else and get that magical number of 8 in its outer shell. Okay? Now, hydrogen bonds stick things together with a piece of, we'll call it like biological scotch tape, okay? It's not Gorilla Tape, it's not duct tape, but it's scotch tape. And amongst attractions of molecules, it's going to be the strongest type of intermolecular force. Now, the word inter means that from molecule to molecule, they can be attached to each other, sometimes for a moment, sometimes longer, but they are the strongest type of intermolecular forces that are out there among some types of molecules. Let's talk about water, for example. Here's one molecule of water held together by covalent bonds. So we're going to call that like duct tape or Gorilla Tape that keeps this molecule together. It's also called an intramolecular force. Now let's imagine that another water molecule is nearby and it's on a crash course for our water molecule there, but its position is a little bit different than the first one. In other words, this H is coming swooping in from the right to the left towards this oxygen. Now, water is a polar molecule. We covered polarity in the last lecture, and we said that sometimes these molecules are like magnets and that some ends of them are positive and some ends are negative. Well, if we look at where all the electrons are in water, it's all around the O. So this O actually has a pretty strong negative charge. And meanwhile, the H's on this end are having their electrons pulled closer towards the O. So they're going to get kind of like a positive end on each one of them. And the same thing's going to happen to this one that came swooping in from the right. The H's are going to have that positive charge associated with them, and the oxygen up on top is going to have a negative charge. Now, notice what's happening right here where this H and this O bump together, a positive and a negative. So what that means is that there's going to be a momentary attraction between these two ends of these two molecules, what we call an intermolecular force that causes them to stick together, and we call that the hydrogen bond because it's between hydrogen and an oxygen. We could do the same thing between two ammonias. Let's imagine there's another ammonia coming in from down here. We'll put the N over here. Here's an H, here's an H over here. Now again, hydrogen bonds are between hydrogen and the 3 most electronegative elements, these 3 here, including nitrogen. So this nitrogen has a negative charge, this H has a positive charge, and this little attraction between the two, that's your hydrogen bond right there. Here was our hydrogen bond between 2 water molecules. You could even do it with this molecule here of hydrogen fluoride or hydrofluoric acid if there was another H coming in, say, from down below, and it was just angled in a different way. So this negative fluorine here would attract that positive, and you'd have another hydrogen bond there. So hydrogen bonds are super important in the fact that they scotch tape biological matter together. And one of the most important things they do, you can look in the center of every cell of your 100 trillion cells where you have an instruction list called DNA. Inside of DNA, you basically have a ladder that's stitched together down the center with hydrogen bonds. Without those hydrogen bonds being there, your DNA does not work the way it's supposed to, and you cease to exist. So ultimately, the blueprint, the instruction list of life is built partially on hydrogen bonds. Last thing I'll mention here is that ionic bonds and covalent bonds are stronger, but they're not intermolecular forces. We said that, water itself, H2O with O in the middle, is connected by covalent bonds here and here. Now, these are called intramolecular forces. They hold a single molecule together. So they're held together by like Gorilla Tape or duct tape. Whereas when they bump into another water molecule, those two water molecules could be connected through hydrogen bonds because that would be intermolecular forces. Just wanted to get that straight. Now, our star of the show, of course, is water, because when we're talking about biology, biology doesn't exist without an aqueous or water-like component, okay? Now, here we have a glacier, and we have, an iceberg, and we have some water around it. Now, this ice part here is going to be represented by what we see here, okay? Now, if you look real close, we got those Mickey Mouse heads, if you will. We got the red big circle here. Then we show our covalent bond this time with a little stick, and then these little turquoise balls right here. These are going to be your hydrogens. So these are water molecule, water molecule, water molecule, water molecule. But then look in between. You have this black dotted line. This is going to be your H bond right here, okay? Now, in ice, you have this very unique structure here. It's a crystalline structure. If you ever take a chemistry class, you'll learn about bond angles and things like that, but we'll just say it's locked into position just like this due to hydrogen bonds. Now, when the water is a little bit warmer, like you see down here, then there's a little bit of loosening up of that rigid structure of the crystal. And then you still have the hydrogen bonds, but they are not rigidly locked into place, and they're temporary. So there's a lot of movement in the water component down below. These are tumbling and jumbling all over each other. So they may only bump into each other and be attracted for a fraction of a second, whereas these in the ice structure and the crystalline structure are going to be locked in place pretty rigidly and will only vibrate versus flow over one another. Here's another look at that DNA example I was giving earlier. So we basically have two sugar phosphate backbones, we call them, down each side of the DNA molecule. And in the middle, you have these things called nitrogenous bases, and they are held together by these black dots again. These are your hydrogen bonds. So there's a special chemical that is symbolized by C and another one by G, and there's 3 hydrogen bonds between the two. There's another connection between a particular molecule called adenine and one called thymine that has 2 hydrogen bonds between them, and it goes like that in the entire length of the DNA. So they're literally stitched together, taped together down the middle with these hydrogen bonds. Okay, next topic is acids and bases. So acids and bases are also part of biology because every living organism has liquid compartments that have to fit within a narrow range of values. And for acids and bases, those values that we're talking about is a special one called pH. But first, let's kind of go into what acids and bases are like. So acids are some of their properties are they react with metals to form hydrogen gas. They taste sour in things like lemon, and that's due to something called ascorbic acid. Obviously, grapefruit, oranges, limes, all of those are going to have acidic properties. If you were to feel them on your skin, it would give you kind of a burning sensation and feel sticky between 2 skin surfaces. They're usually going to be gases or liquids more than anything else. And they do conduct electricity as well when they're in aqueous solutions. And they can react with another chemical on the flip side called a base to produce water and a salt. So biologically speaking, there's a lot of we'll say a lot of issues that revolve around acids in life. And one of them that kind of goes hand in hand with climate change is as more carbon dioxide goes up in the atmosphere and it mingles with the surface of the ocean, it gets absorbed into the ocean and it changes into carbonic acid. So literally the stuff that we're putting out in the atmosphere changes the chemistry of the ocean, which has all kinds of ecological impacts when you start studying those type topics. All right, now on the other side of acids, we have bases. Properties of bases. They react with oils and grease, and that's why we use them as drain and window cleaners. So when you use Windex on an oven stove top or on a window and it gets all the gunk off of there, it's because it's dissolving in a base. Bases conduct electricity as well. When they go into water, they basically ionize, and that conducts electricity. They taste bitter, like eating soap if you had to eat soap. And they feel slippery if you were to get them between two of your skin surfaces. What's actually happening, since they react with oils and grease, is they start dissolving what's on the surface of your skin and your skin a little bit, and that's why you get a slippery feel to that. They can be pretty dangerous as well. Think about Drano cleaning out a sink. You know, what gets down in sink and drain holes? Hairs and gunk and all kinds of gross organic matter. And that liquid Drano essentially dissolves all that stuff. So if you put that on live tissue, it has the same effect. And they usually start off as solids and then they are dissolved in water, as you can see down below. Here are some common things that you may see around the house, and they classify as acids and bases. So here's some citrus fruits. These are acidic. Aspirin, salicylic acid is its official name. Here's some ascorbic acid and vitamin C. Vinegar is very acidic. And then on the other half, on the base side, you have things like milk of magnesia, what you take when you have an upset stomach, Drano for clearing out those drains, ammonia for cleaning floors and things that might get some kind of spatter on them. So what makes an acid versus a base, chemically speaking? Well, it all boils down to two ions that are going to play a key part here. One is called the hydrogen ion, and one is called the hydroxide ion. And that's where this H plus and OH minus come from. That's a hydrogen ion. This is called a hydroxide ion. And, you know, a hydrogen ion itself, I just want to give you a window into what it is. If I was going ahead and deciphering 1/1H, which is our simplest isotope of hydrogen, basically what we have is we have a nucleus that has one proton in it. There's no neutrons because the mass number is 1. And then on the outside, you have a single electron floating around. Now, what happens if that electron leaves? If it leaves, all you're left with is a proton, an H plus ion. So ultimately, what we have left over is just this bare nucleus, one proton in it, and that's the same thing as an H plus ion. Okay? Now, the OH minus hydroxide ion, that one, as you can see, has an oxygen involved and a hydrogen, and it's lost and it's gained an electron. Okay, now let's go ahead and look at the difference between the two. If you are acidic, you're going to be in this scenario here. You have more hydrogen ions than hydroxide ions, and you can count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Hydroxide, 1. Okay? And that also translates to what we call low pH. So acids and bases are found on the pH scale. Low pH has a lot of H pluses. It's kind of counterintuitive, but it's just something you have to remember. Okay? Now, base solutions, on the other hand, these are going to have more hydroxide ions than they do H plus ions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 versus 1. So lots of OH, low numbers of H plus gives you a high pH on the pH scale. Okay, so chemically, this is what's going on. And, people might say, well, this has to do with biology. Absolutely. There are tons and tons of aqueous little, we'll call them containers in organisms that have to be just the right pH level for that organism to be healthy and survive. This picture here gives you a little bit more info on the pH scale. You can see it starts at 0 and it goes all the way to 14 down here at the bottom. And right in the middle of 0, 14 is 7. And 7, wouldn't you know it, is pure water, okay? And that's why pure water is considered so safe. We're made of 78% water in our human bodies. Other organisms have similar percentages. We don't have life without water, okay? And once you start deviating from that 7, you go up in number and down in number. Essentially, you're changing the number of ions inside of those solutions. So let's go to one that has a ton of H pluses and just a few OHs. When you have mostly H plus dissolved in water, you're on the range of pH 1 and 2, battery acid, gastric juice. This is like the hydrochloric acid, what it's contained in your stomach. Lemon juice. Not many people love drinking straight lemon juice because it's so acidic, right? Vinegar, beer, wine, cola, all those have high amounts of H plus ions. And then as you can see, as you get closer to 7, you start getting into some other things that we know. Tomato juice, black coffee, rainwater. Rain is also acidic, which causes its own set of problems. Urine is slightly acidic and saliva as well. Then we have equal numbers of OH and H, and that's what we find in pure water. Okay, so these little brackets mean concentration. The concentration of H plus is equal to the concentration of OH minus, and that's what you have in a neutral solution. But as you start adding more OHs, as you can see in this beaker down here, you start going higher on the pH scale from 7 to 14. First, ocean water is at an 8. Why is ocean water basic? Well, it's basically dissolving rocks, and those ions flow into the water and then change the salinity of it and the amount of OH, the hydroxides in there. 9, 10, we get to milk of magnesia. If you had an upset stomach, if you had too much gastric juice, like up here, and your pH is way down, and you took some milk of magnesia, you would balance the two out. They'd meet somewhere in the middle, so you wouldn't have a gut full of acid, okay, and you'd feel better, and it would produce gas, so you could, burp some relief out. And then as you get in 11, 12, and 13, and 14, we're basically in the realm of cleaners, things that dissolve biological matter like fats and lipids and proteins and tissues and things like that. Okay? All right. Let's kind of take a basic look at some topics that are chemical in nature but have crossover into biology. First, let's define what a substance is. A substance is matter that has a definite composition. So you could think of like water, okay? We know water is H2O and it can only be H2O. You can't have any other formula and expect it to be water. Like if I went ahead and I said, well, what about if I had some extra oxygen? I go to H2O2. Well, if you did this, you just changed from water to hydrogen peroxide, and this has much different chemical properties than water, so they are definitely not the same, okay? But substances have a definite composition that does not change. Here's some other ones. Iodine from the periodic table has a formula I2. Why is it I2 and not I? Well, this one here is what we call a diatomic molecule. For it to be happy, you got to have two of them. So you'll have each iodine atom, and they'll be connected down the middle by a covalent bond. If you remember our talk about valence electrons, a single iodine has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, that's not happy. We said the magical number was 8. Well, what if you had another one? And this one also had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And let's imagine these two are on a crash course for each other. Each one has what the other one needs, which is that 8th electron. So if they squeeze together, what you get then is a covalent bond in the middle, and each one will then have 8 electrons around it. The shared pair in the center counts as 2. So 2, 4, 6, 8. 2468. And that will be the same for bromine, Br2, gaseous chlorine, Cl2. These are substances because they have definite compositions. They're made of diatomic molecules that look a lot like that iodine molecule. This is ammonia. The sphere here on the top of the three legs is nitrogen, and these sticks are covalent bonds. And then the balls at the ends of the sticks, those are hydrogen. So ammonia is another substance. Its formula is NH3, and ammonia is always NH3. As soon as you change the formula, you have something else. So matter has a definite composition in substances. All right, now these substances also have their own sets of properties. Physical properties are characteristics that can be observed or measured without changing the sample's composition. For example, let's look at bromine. This is a brown liquid. That's its color. Its luster, it doesn't really put off light when light shines on it, kind of absorbs light more than anything. It changes from a solid to a liquid at a certain temperature. Not sure what it is, but it could look it up. It would also boil at a certain temperature. Again, that's something that can be looked up. There's a certain density to that liquid. There's a certain solubility to it. Either does or doesn't dissolve in water, or maybe to a degree. That would be a measure of its solubility. And its ability to allow heat to transfer through it would be called the specific heat of this substance. Okay, the higher the number would be, the higher the value would be, the more difficult it would be for heat to pass through it. The lower the number, the easier it is for heat to pass through a substance. So those are all physical properties. I don't have to do anything to the chemical in order to observe or measure those properties. The other one that every substance has is chemical properties. The ability for a substance to chemically combine with or change into another substance. So this is ultimately based on, again, valence electrons. Electrons mean everything in terms of reactions. Okay, that is where the reactions happen, in those electron clouds on the outside, not so much in the nucleus itself. So if we're talking about reactions that substances go through, we're basically talking about the reactivity of any substance. How does it react with other stuff? What happens when I put ammonia in water? What happens if I bubble gaseous chlorine in water? What happens if I put iodine in contact with the air itself, which has oxygen and nitrogen in it? That would be a measure of the chemical property of any of these substances, how it reacts with other stuff. Let's do a little example here. Physical properties of what I'm looking at here, obviously, well, not obviously, but I will say these three are the same things. These come out of the ground, typically in a much dirtier look than what you see here, because they have to be mined. But once you heat them up and you get rid of all the extra stuff, you can then reshape it while it's hot into something like this. So this is a special metal here. This is called zinc. It has a luster to it. Light is shining off of it. It goes from a solid to a liquid at a certain temperature. That would be its melting point. If I keep heating it up, it might go from a liquid to a gas at some point, probably a few hundred to thousands of degrees, because this is a metal. And so it would probably conduct electricity based on what I know about metals. It would probably conduct heat because metals do that too very easily. And then let's look at another chemical substance down here, hydrochloric acid. Well, it looks safe enough, right? Just looks like water, but this is very unsafe. Hydrochloric acid has a lot of those H+ ions floating through it, okay, which makes its properties absolutely extreme when you go high in concentration in it. So you have to be really careful around this one. Gloves, safety goggles, even a chemical gown while you're using this stuff. And this stuff also goes into gas pretty easily, so you want to watch your breathing and make sure you're doing it in a fume hood. All right. So those are the, it's clear, it's colorless, it's odorless, but how do they react? That we don't know from looking at them or measuring them. We got to basically see how they behave when put around other chemicals, other substances. So if I go ahead and now put them together to see what happens, and I put some of this up here, which, if you haven't figured it out yet from the next picture, that's zinc, and this is hydrochloric acid, HCl. You put the two together, and like we said when we were talking about the properties of acids, if you put metals and acids together, the metals will start dissolving and they'll start producing a gas, and this is hydrogen gas. This is H2 being released and going up. You can actually light this gas on fire using a flaming splint at the top of a test tube. And since it's also producing a gas, you can do some pretty fun stuff with it. For example, they're clearly reacting with one another, so that means that their chemical properties are that, the acid reacts with a metal and metals react with acid. So someone's doing it here in a flask, and they're using the H2 that's produced to go into this balloon right here. So this is H2 gas. And then Mr. Smiles here has one of these guys, looks like he was holding onto the balloon. He probably had a candle on this stick and got it real close to the balloon, and it made for a nice explosion of a flammable gas, and probably very, very loud to the homes around this neighborhood when that balloon exploded. So ultimately, they were producing a gas through a reaction. Okay, zinc plus hydrochloric acid yields hydrogen gas plus zinc chloride. And then the second reaction they did was hydrogen and oxygen yielded water and energy. So the hydrogen was in the balloon and the oxygen was in the atmosphere up here. And with a little bit of flame, you were able to combine the two into a reaction that was going in one direction. You got water vapor in the explosion. H2O went up in the atmosphere, and energy through basically the sonic boom, if you were there. And my guess is you'd probably feel a little bit of heat as that exploded. But that also tips you off at reactions, which we'll get to towards the end of the lecture, that you have starting stuff and you have finishing stuff called reactants and products. A little bit more in a little while. All right, so we talked about properties. What about changes that happen? Well, physical changes won't change the chemical composition of the substance, but they can result in a change of state. For example, if I do any of these things here to a substance, I'm not really changing the substance into something else. I'm just changing what it looks like. Okay, for example, here we have some ice cubes that are melting. Okay, the ice cubes are H2O, but so is the melt water coming from those ice cubes. It looks different, but it's still the same substance, just a different change of state. Just like if I took a piece of paper and I crumpled it up, it's still a paper, it's just a different shaped piece of paper if I ripped it in half. So physical changes won't change the substance at all. Now, chemical changes, they require reactions to take place, and new substances will be formed during chemical changes. So if I was looking for key signifier words in the same respect, and I saw words not like these, but instead like explode, oxidize, rust, rot, tarnish, ferment, burn, decompose, those are some action words there. Those are the wow factor words that we have in science, because it's something doing something and actually ending up different than how it started. Okay, so here's a biological example. When this apple goes through decomposition, it decomposes, couple things are happening. The chemicals that it's made of are changing into other things with the help of stuff like bacteria and fungus and things like that that help decompose. And the apple will actually do a little bit of fermentation on the inside. The sugars will change to alcohols on the inside the longer it's laying around. And we could also say, some people would say that apple is rotting. Okay, all of these signify there's chemical change going on. And one of the easiest ways to spot a chemical change when you see a change of color, it means the chemicals are changing inside of something. But make note of the action words. These are signifiers that it's physical changes, and these are signifiers that it's chemical changes. Now, sometimes substances can be mixed up into various proportions. You may have two or more substances that come together and are now a combination of pure substances because they found, other substances to be around. And of course, we're going to just call that a mixture, but we have two types that we want to differentiate from each other. Okay? We have a heterogeneous mixture and a homogeneous mixture. So what's the difference? Well, in a homogeneous mixture, although like in this case here, you can see this orange spheres and then these diatomic molecules of green, but they're mixed up pretty good, okay? And when that happens, we label it as a homogeneous mixture. Now, if by using our sight we can clearly see distinctly visible parts, we're then talking about a heterogeneous mixture. And this one here, if you look in the little view window, clearly we have a layer on top and a layer underneath. And that would be visible with the naked eye. Like, think of Italian dressing, in your kitchen cupboard. When you don't shake it up, you see two layers, right? You see the oil layer and the vinegar layer. So they have clearly different parts associated with them that you can make out visually. With a homogeneous mixture, you're not going to get that, okay? So let's take a look at the caption. Most materials we encounter in the world are mixtures. The air we breathe is a mixture of oxygen, nitrogen, and other gases. The oceans are mixtures of water, salt, and other substances. So with the air, for example, when we look up in the sky, we typically can't say, oh, there's a pocket of nitrogen, there's a pocket of oxygen, there's a pocket of carbon dioxide. It all mixes up. It all looks the same, right? But if I was to take a sample of ocean water and look at it real close, I'm going to find all kinds of little things floating in there, and it's not going to be perfect. Everything that I see looks the same. I'm going to see little bits of plant matter. I might get some little tiny animals in there. I might get some sand in there. So that will be very heterogeneous in comparison to a homogeneous mixture. So the key to heterogeneous mixtures is distinctly visible parts. Homogeneous mixtures also are known as solutions. So if you hear homogeneous solution, have your mind say homogeneous mixtures, let me add that to it, are equivalent to solutions, okay? Now, again, let's repeat, they have constant composition throughout. They all look the same, okay? You don't see distinctly visible differences in your samples. And there's many types of solution systems out there. For example, there's gas solutions, and like we just said, that's going to be the air that we all know in our atmosphere. And if we want to get more specific, I could say carbon dioxide in air. I can't see carbon dioxide, but I know it's there if I take some chemical tests on what's inside of my air sample. So carbon dioxide is part of the air mixture. Nitrogen is about 70%, oxygen is about 20%. Carbon dioxide, we give that reading in parts per million. Currently we're at about 450. All right, we also have gas liquid mixtures. Oxygen in your blood. Okay. One of the things, if someone gets sick, that they'll want to test at the doctor's office or possibly at the hospital is, what is your oxygen saturation level in your blood? How much oxygen do you have in your blood fluid? Now, if you look at a vial of blood, you don't see it in there. You have to get a reading on that oxygen in blood with some specialized equipment, but it's in there. You just can't see it. That makes it homogeneous. A liquid gas solution, LG. That would be the humidity in the air. Like in the summertime, you go outside, you're like, man, it's hot and sticky out here. You don't see the actual water vapor in the air, but you know it's there, and you can use scientific equipment to see what level it's at, see what percent it's at, or you can watch the news and they might say, hey, it's 100% humidity out there today, which means its air is fully saturated with that water vapor. A liquid solution, perhaps someone is checking their blood alcohol content level, their BAC. You can look at the blood and say, okay, where's the alcohol at? Well, you can't see it because it's in the mixture. It's homogeneous. But again, specialized equipment, and we can detect how much alcohol is in the blood. There's solid liquid solutions, such as seawater itself. Let's take away all the little bits of sand and plant life and animal life, and what you're left with is a salty water. But in a glass, it just looks like regular water, okay, if you filtered out all the little tiny things. But it would taste very salty if you gave it a taste. And then lastly, you can even have solid homogeneous mixtures. How could I have a solid? Solids can mix? Yeah, sure they can. Get a couple metals, you heat them up till they're red hot, and you mix them together and let them cool off. That's called an alloy. Or even some people have silver fillings in their teeth called dental amalgam. It's silver and mercury mixed together, and it's fairly pliable, so you can drill a hole in a tooth, shove it in there, and block bacteria from making a home inside of a tooth. But it all looks the same. It's still a silver substance that's all looks the same. Now, while we're talking about solutions, I want to drop a couple terms. A solvent. A solvent is the part that's in greater quantity. So, like, let's use the seawater as an example. Okay, seawater is more water than it is salt. Okay, there's a lot of salt in there, but there's definitely a lot more water. Okay, the solute is the part that's in lesser concentration. So in this case here, the salt would be in the lesser concentration, and I'm going to put greater, and these brackets mean concentration. Salt, lesser concentration. Okay, so try to remember that solvent is where there's more of one part of it. Solute is where it's less than the other part of it. All right, last thing we're going to talk about is chemical reactions, and these occur when bonds are formed or broken, causing substances to recombine into different substances. All right, so this is where it goes down. We talked about chemical properties and chemical changes, and we can keep track of them as we organize chemical reactions, okay? Now, I'm going to use a couple from the world of biology here, and the first one is going to be ones that plants use, the plant kingdom, okay? And it goes like this, okay? We have CO2 plus H2O yields C6H12O6 plus O2. Now, this is the chemical reaction for photosynthesis. Okay? Plants are able to do this. They take this out of the sky, they take this up from the roots, and they're able to change it into sugar. That's what this molecule is here. And from the water, we're able to split it into oxygen to release from the actual plant itself back into the atmosphere. Now, couple of things. We want to know the reactants and the products. Well, these two here are the reactants, okay? Because they are the ingredients necessary to make the sugar and the oxygen, which are called your products, okay? Now, there is a catalyst to this whole process, and that's UV light. Of course, we need sunlight to aid in making this happen. But ultimately, this is the chemical reaction of photosynthesis. Now, we have another one in biology, a very, very important one, and it goes like this. C6H12O6 plus O2 yields CO2 plus H2O. Now, this one here is called cellular respiration. Now, this is, if you could imagine your cells going through a process where they take in sugar and from it they make energy, because I can also put over here plus ATP. ATP is a special kind of biological energy. But this is ultimately the food we eat right here, okay? It can be converted into glucose, which is our molecule of energy, our main molecule of energy in our body, okay? Here's the oxygen we breathe in. Here's the CO2 we exhale, which also comes out of each individual cell. And as a byproduct, we also make water and energy compound called ATP. But again, for cellular respiration, this stuff here before the arrow, these are called your reactants. There we go. Let me write it again so it's clear. Reactants. And then over here we have our products. Okay. Now, interestingly, if you look at photosynthesis, cellular respiration is the exact reverse of it. So in this case, our products were glucose, sugar, and oxygen. And cellular respiration, those are reactants. And through this process, we then get CO2 and H2O, which become the reactants for photosynthesis. So ultimately, we have a big cycle going on here. So the products of photosynthesis become the reactants of cellular respiration. The products of cellular respiration become the reactants of photosynthesis. And it goes on and on and on, and that gives us some biological continuity. Okay, and hopefully you can see the connection there. So make sure you understand the idea of a chemical reaction, that it takes reactants to produce products. And once you take all of the chemical reactions that occur within an organism, they get a special name. It's called metabolism. Okay, so this one here for cellular respiration, this is part of organisms' metabolism. Are there other chemical reactions going on inside of their bodies? Absolutely. But this is a big one right here. Okay? So when you put them all together within an organism, that is an organism's collective metabolism. Okay? All right, so we're going to stop this lecture here for today. Hopefully you learned a lot, and I'll catch you at the next one. Bye-bye, guys.